You're listening to Hayes Radio Network, Cannabis Lifestyle Radio.
All right, and we're here back with another episode of Behind the Leaf with your host, Alec, and your co-host, Cassie.
Hey, what's up?
So we got an amazing guest here for you guys today. We got Lance from Grove Bags. He's the CMO of the company, and he's going to do a lot better job introducing himself than I will, so I'm going to let him take it away.
Yeah, thanks. No, you're spot on. Yeah, CMO of Grove Bags, came on with this company just a handful of months ago, really just to bring him in and kind of scale him up. That's become a bit of my forte in the cannabis industry, so very much have enjoyed it and was stoked. To Andrew's point, he said you guys were coming to town, and like he said, I literally just got back from Santiago, Chile for the Expo Weed convention.
That's awesome.
Down there. Yeah, it was cool.
Wow.
It's the Expo Weed Convention?
Yeah, so Expo Weed is a really cool series. So that's another thing. Like, my focus has been as much on international cannabis as it has domestic, but Expo Weed is a series that starts out every year in Mexico and works its way down from Mexico to Colombia to Chile to Uruguay. And so the one that I've always been a fan of, because I have a few friends that I've been mentoring for the last several years in the industry down in Santiago, and I was amazed. They had 23,000 people at this expo.
Oh, wow. That's insane.
Wow.
That's crazy.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, if you kind of look at it, like, a lot of people talk about MJ Biz, which is our biggest B2B.
Like 40,000 or something like that?
Yeah, it's last year. I think they claim. I think they said like 25 or 30,000 last year. I think that's the amount of registrants versus attendees.
Yeah, wow, that's crazy, because that was my first one last year, and was like, for me, that was like, wow, that's a lot. That's big.
Oh, it is, man. It's kind of like if you come from the electronics industry with CES or the auto industry with SEMA, like those are their big like flagship shows every year, and that's definitely MJ Biz for us. But it's interesting because they finally took I always reference them as like being the Super Bowl of cannabis conventions. They finally quoted me last year. But the thing that they didn't quote was the fact they always say, yeah, but if that's a Super Bowl, then something like Spanibus in Barcelona every year is FIFA. Like, that's World Cup.
Yeah.
Because you get a lot of people now, you're getting more international at MJ Biz, but you go to Spanibus and that's one of the only shows I work where there's people from every continent in the industry that I like, friends from APAC, from Australia.
Yeah, I've been hearing about Spanibus for a while now, and everyone's been telling me to go.
It's
I
a
definitely
good
have
one.
to carve out some time in the next year or two to head out there.
I would, man. And it's definitely take the least amount of time I recommend for people going is a week. Like, you really, not just to get acclimated, because it's 9 hours. Well, for you guys, it's only 6 hours ahead.
Yeah.
It's not as bad.
I'm like, wait,
for me,
time zones.
Yeah,
time zones.
For me, it's 9 hours ahead. So, going in and getting acclimated. But there's a reason why the Romans and Greeks, dominated that area. It really is a beautiful spot. And you're right there, on the water. And they've got phenomenal food. And it's kind of what we call a manana kind of laid back mentality.
That's
but
nice.
that's a good show. But yeah, but this was, 23,000 people, in the population of Chile is 19.3 million.
Yeah, wow.
So you look at that, and compared to, like you said, like even if it's 30,000 MJ Biz, this country has 318 million. Like, you look at it proportionally, like, it's a pretty big show, but international kind of.
Yeah, because I just went to one in New York City. It was run by Kleiner Global, and it was cannabis and psychedelics and like an investment seminar. And it was my first one run by them, and it was like I used to MJ BizCon and stuff like that. So it was really small, like in like an office room almost. But it was a very good seminar and stuff. One of the companies I'm involved in, Merida Capital, they were speaking there and stuff like that. They were on the panel. And actually, I'm going to another one in New York City on the day we get back from California.
Yeah, I think we get in at midnight, and then we have to be there in the morning.
Because you guys sound like me.
Yeah.
It never stops, but it's all good things. It's fun.
Yeah, we like fly out at 4:30, land at midnight, then I got to be in this New York City at like 9 in the morning.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Fun.
So it should be interesting. But yeah, so how did you start getting into cannabis? What was the
Take us way back.
Oh my gosh.
Take us way back.
As you
I'm a Gen
go.
Xer, I was going to say, so that's a few years. No, I got into it. I grew up around it. So as much as I made fun of hippies when I was a kid growing up in the 80s, because, that was the thing. Like, the hippies, it's like,
Flower
Summer of
power.
Love. Yeah, that was from back in the 60s. That was hella old. So I'm like, But I kind of, as I grew up, learned to kind of respect and appreciate the whole back to Mother Nature and the more wholesome, healthy. Now all of a sudden I find myself loving kombucha and acai bowls and all this stuff.
Same here, yeah.
I converted, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I grew up around it. And so it was never really taboo, growing up in the Bay Area, although I was in the North Bay, closer to the Triangle. I don't know. It was always around. Like, it was never, and we were the birth of the yuppie and alternative lifestyle movement and all these other things. So I never looked at it quite in the lens of the war on drugs or the DARE, although we were exposed to that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, honestly, I just started sharing about a year ago because I know statute of limitations have run up. But
it's always
I know, right? It's always a factor, right? But that's, cannabis is really how I was able to save up for going off to college. So I went to school in San Luis Obispo and, ironically enough, studied criminal justice.
That's what he did. That's what I did.
Yeah,
that's so funny.
Yeah, I went to college for criminal justice at first, and then I started learning about it. And honestly, it wasn't what I thought being a cop and all that stuff was really going to be about. It was very political, all this bureaucracy and all this stuff, and like they were considering like corruption, falling asleep on your 12-hour, and at the end of your 12-hour shift in your car when it's like 3:00 in the morning. And like you don't need to get fired or like anything for that. So like I was like, this isn't what I want to do. And then I got into real estate, and I've always wanted to get into the cannabis industry, but the deals that were flying across the table, like I've said in previous shows, they were just too big.
Yeah,
it was
a lot of them are.
When cannabis
big asks.
Oh yeah, when cannabis was first coming out, people were looking for like upwards of $5-10 million at a minimum.
Yeah, because most of the
grows that are $30-40 million to set up.
Yep.
And all this stuff, but then something finally came along, and I was able to get involved. And now I've been going to the conferences, there's all this stuff, and really connecting with the community and really learning out there what cannabis is truly about.
I remember when you were in school for criminal justice, you did that paper on cannabis. Remember?
Oh wow!
I think that kind of. I mean, you've always been like an enthusiast, but it was like that spark, and I'm like, I know this is what he's going to end up doing.
Yeah, because like you probably did the same thing as me. I don't know if you grew up, but I grew up with Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers. I remember there was a scene in Sesame Street. Is always one of these kids is doing their own thing. 3 of these kids are doing the same.
Right.
That's what I felt like when we were learning. I think it was during our patrolling course when we were learning about the whole scheduling, right? So I'm like, Schedule 1, okay, like it makes sense, heroin and PCP, and then cannabis was there, and I'm like, wait, that makes no sense. That makes no sense.
We were just talking about that the other day.
We were just talking about that the other day of why cannabis is a Schedule 1 drug, and for those of you out there who don't know what a Schedule 1 drug means, is that it provides no medical benefit to you at all.
Yeah, like.
They consider cocaine a Schedule 2, I think, because it provides a medical benefit. Like it provides a medical benefit. To put that in perspective, like and we were just talking about that and how the current administration just called for them to deschedule it, but realistically, it was kind of just like. I want to call it pissing in the wind a little bit because
it's a political. It's midterms.
It's elections, so it is what it is.
Yeah, we're going to expunge all the federal offenders, and that's going to affect 6,200 people. The thing that I negate to mention is there's nobody.
About all the other charges that they're charged with?
Right? Exactly right. And
nobody's in federal prison for just
there's nobody
possession.
in federal prison. That's it. That's what I was going to say. Like it's not applicable to a single individual that's currently incarcerated in the federal prison system. To your point, like. It's small possession plus something else. It's not just small possession. So while it did help expunge even a few of my friends, records, which is awesome, to your point, it was such a political play. We thought Trump was going to play it as a card, to be honest. A lot of my friends were like, oh, Trump's going to legalize it so he can get buy-in because 73+% of the population supports legalization on some level or another, either medical only or medical and adult use or adult use only.
Oh, yeah, totally.
So it's like when 3/4 of the population is like, we could make some money off that. It's like, I could see as a politician use that as a Hail Mary.
Definitely. And especially, once they pass, like, hopefully pass, like, the banking acts and stuff like that to where cannabis companies can actually use proper banks and do all that proper stuff the right way. And once that happens, I feel like it's just inevitable at that point.
It is.
Because
I think it is too.
The big corporations are going to be involved, especially with the banks, and the banks aren't going to want to lose out on their money, the millions of dollars that they're getting from these cannabis companies.
That's exactly it.
So they're going to have to force the government to fucking legalize
do something, and that's the thing.
Do something at least.
It's still the fastest growing industry in the world, and pardon the pun, there's a lot of them.
Definitely.
But there's 350,000 plus employees just in this country alone that are literally employed because of this plant, and so it's something that you can't really ignore. There's other categories, other industries that don't even come close to that. that.
Yeah, and it's a new industry for people to find all kinds of work and different kinds and discover different kinds of positions out there, because it's just insane. It's not like you're having your traditional job or whatever. But we won't talk too much more about politics.
Yeah, no. So that's,
I know that's
so going back to I actually, that was part of was me selling to save up to go to school, and then luckily I became a resident advisor as industry enough, the first ever freshman RA at Cal Poly up in San Luis.
That's cool.
So that helped me pay for room and board, free room and board, right? But it's interesting because same thing, like criminal justice, as much as I appreciate it, and the intent for me to pursue that avenue was because of being able to help people. So I always want to be like the safety officer or the community officer for CHP or for county sheriffs. And that was what attracted me to it. But it's interesting. I ended up getting into digital media and advertising, and then there came a time in my career, specifically in late 2013, where a former SVP of mine at Scripps was like, "Hey," she had just moved over to Colorado to take over DFM's flagship property, and she's like, "I think there's a hero path for you, and yada yada, and we're launching this cannabis website, and you're from Northern California." A lot of my friends on social media, of course, are like, "We know why you're moving to Colorado," because all eyes were on Colorado. That's the adult use market, right? And sure enough, I moved out there and started segueing into it. But I came in from an ancillary, and I've always been, yes, I'm a home grower and an advocate and consumer from a medical standpoint, but I've always been on the ancillary side. But that's what really got me in was passion. And then being tied to an industry that isn't just about getting people rich, because I was in .com, and then it's about getting, rather be the Cox sisters at, working for Autotrade.com, or rather it be IHS and Polk for getting, them rich working at Autotrade.com. Like there's a lot of digital media companies I work for. And it helped make people's lives easier when it came to purchasing a car or finding out vehicle history. But I didn't feel like I was really impacting on people's lives. Yeah. And then cannabis, I did. I was like, it impacted mine. Being a cancer survivor, I shifted my ideology towards like holistic medicine and Eastern medicine. So from a proactive standpoint, so it affected me. And then I think the pivotal point for me was when I was with the cannabis, and it was probably 2015. They actually won a prize for this series, but we were covering all of the kids that were moving, the families of kids that were moving to Colorado with grand mal and epileptic seizure issues.
Oh, okay.
And so I actually saw it firsthand. It was crazy because these people were selling everything they owned to move into a trailer in Pueblo or wherever, just somewhere to be in a legal state.
Right.
And I saw, a child who had gone from 95 seizures a week to 5. And I was like, wow, this is like, I want to be a part of that. Like you can't ignore that.
You really can't. Like I remember watching documentaries, and parents were so worried about their kids. Like you said, like they have multitude seizures a day, and they have zero to go down to zero or very few. Yep. Yeah. And then they have to go visit family for holidays in an illegal state, or they have to go somewhere for something. Yeah. And they start freaking out because if their kid has to go to the hospital because they had a seizure and whatever, and they find THC in that minor system,
that's a big
they're
problem.
calling CPS, they're calling the cops, and it's not going to end well. And just for providing your kids with the medication that you want, and it's healthy and it's not harming them, it's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah. And that goes back to the stigma and tabooism. And you all know, you just flew into LA, which this is like the epicenter of entertainment and movies and everything. And it's interesting because people are like, well, who do you think really fueled the war on drugs? And I'm like, well, for my generation, it was Ronald. Well, it's more so Nancy Reagan and a guy
just named.
He always says that.
Yes,
just say no.
Yeah, just say no. It was the Reagan era, voodoo economics, Reagan economics era. Right. But it was Darrell Watts who was the head of LAPD, and he presented that to Nancy Reagan, and Nancy Reagan really embraced it. And so that was the war on drugs I grew up with. But even my parents, they grew up with Nixon's war on drugs, which happened in 1971. But then, our great-grandparents, the silent generation, they grew up with Anslinger, which you probably read enough about this in criminal law. He was the original one who was starting prohibition back in the early teens, 20s, 30s of last century. And so, this war on drugs, but I tell people that there's other things that perpetuate it, like Hollywood. I'm like, why is Hollywood keeping the fucking stigma of Spicoli ordering a pizza, or Pineapple Express?
That's like a perfect example. Yeah, I see exactly what you're saying. But that's the whole reason why we started this podcast, was to educate people, break the stigma.
Exactly.
Now that we started it, family, friends who, had like thought a certain way about it, or like opening up, they're kind of curious, asking questions. I'm like, this is the point. I'm like, yes,
that's exactly.
I love it.
Yeah.
And when it's one-on-one, like you all know, and like we had discussed, I have in my own podcast. for the one thing that's most interesting for me is the fact that a lot of the education has to be one-on-one. Like as much as I travel, people are like, I don't push it on anyone. I don't. I'm an advocate, not an activist, which means I lead with education, not with forced beliefs. Yeah. And so I'll be in an Uber or right? Because you can't force, and nobody likes anything. No,
then they're going to be closed off.
No.
The walls go up immediately.
You don't change minds with the force. You change them with facts.
So no matter if it's a flight attendant or an Uber driver or a front individual at a hotel that's checking me in, like they'll ask, "Oh, what are you in town for?" Small town, and in town for a convention, and then oftentimes they ask, "Well, what convention?" I'm like, for Weed Week or for Expo Weed or for MJ Biz, and is that like about cannabis? Yeah, and then it's so interesting because to Yarl's point, certain individuals be like, can I ask you some questions? I'm like, yeah, that's. I'm actually an educator in the industry. I write an article about this stuff. Yeah,
that's always what you do. Please ask me as many questions as you want. Yeah, I love talking about it.
And I hate it when people start. I mean, I hate, that's a bad word. I dislike how people start a conversation with, well, this is probably a dumb question. It's probably a stupid question, and I'm always like, the only dumb question is the one that isn't asked. Like that is the fact that you're open to learn is the first step to being educated. Totally. So that's a big thing for me. So going back to, how I segued into it, thankfully was because of my experience in digital media and marketing. And I've been fortunate in building some really great brands and being associated with some great brands in the industry. But the one thing that's interesting, and it's very applicable with where I'm at now with Grove Bags, and I'm fortunate to have an awesome CEO that created our technology for his older brother who, unfortunately has cerebral palsy. And so he wanted to find a way to retain the quality of his medicine.
Right.
But the one thing that I'm always adamant about with any company I work for in this industry is that they recognize they're hiring on me, as an advocate, not just as a marketing specialist or as a business development guy. Like I bring my advocacy, and hopefully you're okay with that. Because if you're not, I can go work somewhere else. But that's a big element, just like the opportunity to be a guest on your guys' show.
Totally.
That's a big element of, I feel like I'm making an impact on lives.
Right, and that's your passion. Yeah, that's what you want to do. Exactly it. So there you go. You got to bring it with you throughout all the avenues of your life.
That's
great.
Very true. Yeah, love what you do, right?
Exactly. You'll never work a day in your life. That's what they say.
Exactly it.
So and speaking of what you do, so with Grove Bags and stuff like that, let's explain. Let's dive into that. What do you do now?
Yeah, it's fun. So Grove Bags company I've been keeping an eye on for a while. Technically started back in 2016 by Jack Grover. Really great, really phenomenal guy. He, like me, is an advocate. He's definitely, obviously because of the experience in caregiving for his brother and growing his own medicine for his brother. So we have a lot of similarities there. But, he came along with this technology. And it's interesting because I was just talking to a friend in the industry whom you got to meet just before now. And he's like, yeah, I'm getting ready to order some bags. I got to get some Mylars. And I'm like, no, you don't have to get Mylar. He's like, it's not really good for the bud. I'm like, no, metal in any sort of biomass encourages oxidation. That's not really a good thing. Yeah, so I started telling him. So what Jack came up with was this technology that, for one, it auto cures the flower. So it's soft-sided. Virgin polymer is what we use, a type of plastic. And we're able to maintain the perfect relative humidity as well as it's antimicrobial, anti-static, and UV protected.
Oh, very nice.
So nothing against mason jars, because that's what I used up until last year. But mason jars don't keep out the UV. Mason jars don't have the best leak down. They're very porous, but yet they don't breathe. And so, mason jars aren't the most ideal. Turkey bags are made for cooking turkeys, not for, for storing flour.
Not for cannabis.
Same with toast, not for cannabis. Yeah. So that's what our technology does. And, for me, it's kind of a twofer when I come on with the company. Again, it's while my passion is in the marketing and in building a brand, also I do a lot of business development. So that's a reason for travels to, like I shared with you, just coming back from Santiago, but did a 4-week tour over, my team did. I cut out about 2.5 weeks, but did a tour to go speak over in England and the Netherlands and Germany earlier this summer. And so that's a lot of it too, is going out and plugging the brand I work for into my existing network. So to take it really global.
Expanding that and taking it globally.
Exactly. And with a technology like this, we're fortunate because, again, it's not just a jar. It's not just a bag. It's not, and I even educate my employees. I say, remember, we're a technology company first and a packaging company second.
Yeah.
But that's where it comes into my advocacy, because once people understand how it preserves and maintains the quality, consistency, and potency of the flower, which is imperative as a medicinal advocate.
Oh, yeah, totally.
that's when they get it. They're like, okay. So yeah, that's what grow bags is.
It's not your typical Ziploc bag.
No, it's not. And I mean, not as much as we love to, hey, that's, I used them.
I mean, hey, I've gotten
Ziploc bags.
Didn't everyone at some point?
Cannabis and everything from a Ziploc bag to a pizza box once. So
oh my gosh, classic. We so neglected flour when we were younger. It's crazy, but it's come a long way. And technology has in general. There's so many. It's interesting when people hear the term technology, they always think of robots or computers.
Yeah, or like a cell phone.
Yeah, or a cell phone. But technology is any innovation that brings improvement to an existing environment. And that couldn't be more applicable than now in producing this flour. Because even myself learning how to growing up, a lot of wives' tales, a lot of rumors. Well, this is how you do this. This is how you do that. It's so subjective. Yeah. It matters, what you're growing, where you're growing, how you're growing, what you're growing it in. There's so many variables. Yeah. And so a lot of those, you should burp it for this long, or you should cure it for that, or you should dry it for that long.
Do it for this long, or you should face it west, or whatever. Like use
ozonated water. It's crazy
something like that. Because everyone has their own home remedies and stuff like that for everything. But in like my time and going to conferences and stuff like that, with growing and packaging, like with all the companies out there right now, it's a lot of Me Too companies.
Yes,
everyone does the same thing basically. All shit.
Yep.
And nobody's really branching out into like how to make these things better. Yeah. Like with
it's
technology.
Very true.
Like what you guys are doing. You took the Mylar bag is not.
Yeah.
Is not doing the job.
Mylar is great for storing potato chips. Yeah, it's great for food because it creates that proper vapor barrier and oxygen seal that you need for your Doritos. Yeah. But like to your point, that was just, and I saw that a lot. It's interesting because it's dog years. You all have probably figured this out already. but me being in it since 13, early 14, like I've seen a lot. But to your point, it was a lot of Me Too. It's a lot of people repurposing. Even a company I worked for, they had a technology that they developed for a totally different industry. Then they applied it to this one. It just so happened it worked, which is great. And I support that. But in most instances, to your point, just because you've been packaging lozenges for a company for X amount of years, or you've been doing insurance for certain types of companies, or that doesn't make you an expert, and that doesn't mean it's necessarily applicable to this plant, let alone this industry and community.
Yeah, totally. So true. And we can't stop learning how to make things better, especially with cannabis. He was like, even with the one of the dab rigs I was just using a few minutes ago, the ice buyers. They're doing a great thing because now they're taking away the stigma of like taking a dab and it looks like you're doing crack.
Oh my God!
You got
that torch does not lie.
You got like the blue chain torch and the whole thing. I remember when I first started doing it, Cassie was like, "What are you doing?" Like
freebasing.
Yeah.
It does. And again, we can show it's criminal justice, but when you see someone bust out a torch or an aggressive flame, it's associated with crack cocaine,
or like you're like, this isn't cannabis. You're like, what is this?
That's definitely not your first thought. Yeah.
But now they can create devices that it's all electronic, does it with electricity and heats it up, and it's great. Like it looks clean, it looks nice, and that's one of the biggest things I feel like with like the older generations and stuff like that they like the older generation, like they don't want to smell the cannabis, they don't want to see the flower. It's still that like you see it,
there's still a stigma.
You're like, there's still a stigma. But when I've showed old like people that like my dad, my stepmom, like people like look at these products that don't look like cannabis.
Oh, 100%.
They don't look like cannabis at all. Like I just talked to this one company called 1906.
Oh yeah, I love what they're doing. Do you know them?
They've been around for a minute. Yeah, they're good guys.
Yeah,
they've been around for a minute.
And they make like the pills and stuff like that.
I like them.
Like the Genius pills, stuff like that. So I was talking to them recently, and looks like you're just taking an Advil or
100%.
I like how it's specific to what you want to feel. It's like the chill. Like I took one of the chill ones before coming on the podcast, and honestly, my anxiety went down so much. I was like, I love this.
Yeah, and it's something that I'll tell you a funny story. So when I was general manager at the Cannabis, and this is one of the first news sites. This was my first kind of true segue into the industry. And is the first news site that kind of covered the good, the bad, the ugly. Like there was Dope Magazine, David Tran's thing, and there was, Matt Stang over at High Times. There were these culture-centric educational platforms or news platforms. But, the Cannabis was like the first. And it's interesting. I remember getting a call from a guy who was looking to transition into the industry that he was actually one of the guys that was behind kind of evolving the technology that's associated with the chemicals in Roundup, which is, Asian orange. I mean, that stuff is like,
you kill it very, very,
and
very
as soon as
bad.
he told me where he's coming from, I was about to hang out, honestly, because that is, I mean, I guess a little hippie of me, but I was like, I don't want to hear this clown. He's working for the Antichrist, right? And so
working for the enemy.
Yeah, exactly, for the enemy. And then he was a scientist, so he did give a little more objective perspective. He's like, what's hard for people to understand about cannabis, and that was hard for us, coming from a big industry like that, is it can be ingested in every single way. So exactly to your point, a lot of people don't realize, and I can tell you because I've tried every method, but to your point, like traditionally smoking or your buddy's brownies. Like that's what our parents grew up with.
That's what I grew up with.
When you
That's what they
consume
say.
weed,
That's what they think of.
that's what they think of. They think of a joint
or a brownie.
or the special brownies.
Right, and like people will say that, their doctor has recommended it or they want to try it, but it's like, I can't smoke because my lungs. I'm like, there are other ways. You can take a tincture, you can take edibles, you can.
That's what I was going to say. Like
so many other things.
Yeah, I've used them, for certain ailments, topicals, to your point. I've used a transdermal. I had diverticulitis in my intestine and couldn't eat for 24 hours. I was on antibiotics, so my stomach hurt. I was nauseous, the pain, and I put a 24-to-1, so 24 parts CBD to 1 part THC as far as the ratio, and I could not. The pain went away, the nausea went away. That's when I got sold, to be honest, on consuming it in other means. But to give an example, and this is totally off the record, but happened to forget about a device that was in my backpack when I went to Santiago. And I was hanging out, and I speak enough Spanish, but it's interesting because my Spanish is more like Mexican or California Spanish, not so much a proper, like South America is a different style.
Well, you get the dialect from Mexico.
Exactly. So it was a little bit lost in translation, but these guys were sitting down. I was hanging out, outside just chilling for a minute, and these guys, and their passenger, I was like, no, I'm okay. And I actually had it's a small disposable, but a really high quality pen from California. And they looked at like, what? And I'm like, I just told them to try it in Spanish. And they were just like blown away because the flavor from the terpenes, California, we kind of have high expectations.
California weed,
They're like, oh my God. Like one of them, you could just see his face. And then all of them, they're consuming probably down there 13, 14% THC. Not that everything's about THC, but that does.
Well,
that's the
here
engine.
In California now.
Terpenes. We're about the steering wheel more so than the engine.
Right.
But you could just tell all of them from an experiential standpoint, it was not what they're used to consuming.
Nope.
But that was a format that they don't even have there. Like a lot of people don't realize that concentrates in general. They just really came into fruition. I'm not counting space cakes and brownies, but like the true oils and tinctures, transdermals, like that all has just come into fruition in the last few years in Europe.
Totally.
While we're the technology leader, they're not that far behind.
Yeah. Even in even backward from North Carolina, New York, all that stuff, nobody consumed. Like rarely people consume the concentrates. Like they do,
very few people.
like they do here in California.
Right? Oh yeah, for us.
Like I'll tell people,
you just had one before you came on.
Yeah, I'll tell people, I'll be like, oh, they smoke, heavy smokers. I'll know them, like, oh, you dab? They'd be like, nah, we don't do that. Yeah. Like that's way too strong. I'd be like, what are you talking about?
Saves time and energy.
Yeah, I'm like, all right, saves time, energy, saves time, energy, and a little bit of weed too. So
I don't know if you remember the company, but remember they were like Listerine strips. Those were really cool.
That was
who were those?
Oh,
I do remember. Did you guys ever come across the ones that were dosed toothpicks too? Super dope.
I've heard of
it
that.
was like
Never
10
tried
minutes.
Heard of the toothpick.
You just suck on the toothpick.
Huh.
And
That's cool.
I mean, like and that's so people ask me, they're like, oh, do you? So I'm a microdoser, and that's what keeps my tolerance in an ideal place. Because if you do, you guys know, it starts wearing on you. So I microdose, and so I'm more so on the edible side. And so people are like, oh, well, do you travel? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, if it's a mint or if it's a
you can't. It's food.
I'm like, I put in my edibles because most of them are, little jellies or whatever. I'll put them in with my Sour Patch Kids. I'm like,
with candy.
I do this. I used to do the same thing. I would mix it in with my candy and stuff like that. Nobody knows
exactly.
Yeah,
but it definitely is. It's changed, and that's part of the stereotypes and the personas are like, oh, if you consume cannabis, you smoke, and it's like, no, not everyone's a stoner. Not everyone's that 1 or 2%er. There's some people that actually consume in a more modern way. Even dryer. I don't know if you dry herb vape too. Like I've got a G pen. I've got
yeah.
So
I've done that throughout the years.
People are like, oh, do you burn? I'm like, yeah, I'll roll joints when I'm in places where that's all it's available. I'm all but at home. I'll use my G pen or I'll use my Firefly. Put in a 0.5 gram. Bring the temperature down to burn off the terpenes first to really get that experiential. I'm all about convectional. why you don't need to light on fire anymore to get the
right, exactly.
Yeah, like there are so many like if it's like a health perspective that you are coming from, then like there's so many ways out there than combustion and smoking.
And that's us here, right?
People are always like, oh, like it's still like carcinogenic. Like I'm not gonna lie to people, like smoking anything in any kind of form is not healthy for you. Yeah. And like if you don't think that smoking, like actual burning cannabis and inhaling smoke is good for you, then like you gotta recheck some things. Yeah. But the cannabis itself is not. It's now trying to figure out the healthiest way and the safest way to do that.
And what works for you too.
And what works for you too.
Because I have some friends.
That's the hardest part.
Everybody's different.
That's when you get into, obviously it on a molecular level converts into a different iteration when you ingest it, as far as edibles. But I have some friends that are like, it doesn't. I have a buddy in particular, and he's like, I'll give him like 20 milligrams. Like, I'm not feeling anything.
That's what he says. He says it doesn't really do it for him.
I'll consume like 100 milligram edible, and I'll be sitting there and be like, when is this gonna like? I'll be like, I'll get like the like maybe like feel like the giggles for like a second, and then it like dissipates. But it's not like smoking, and it's not like
when it's converting to hydroxy 11, it's just not doing anything for you. But then other people will be like, you give him 5 milligrams and oh my gosh,
Yeah, for her,
that's like for me.
Like 5 milligrams, he's like, oh my God, I'm so
good.
I'm perfect too. I'm like the perfect buzz. For some, it's probably comparable to like a glass or two of wine, but no, I'm totally fine. But it is interesting how it does, to your point, it's very subjective on the individual. And it goes back to, that's education. Like you need to figure out what works for you, because cannabis works for a lot of people, but it is, to your point, just as relevant how much and how you take it as it is what you're taking.
Oh, no, yeah, totally. Because if you go into the, like I was talking to somebody recently about like, they were like, is cannabis addictive, stuff like that. I go, no, but if you go into it using the wrong mindset, it's not going to help you. You have to be in the right mind, know what you're doing, and keep it and use it for the right reasons. Yeah, and just like anything else. Just like if you drink too much water, you can overdrink too much water. You can.
It's totally true.
You can overdo it on anything.
You can overdo it on everything. I learned that. That's something I also learned from Europeans. Everything in moderation. People are like, and I gave up drinking like 3 years ago. I only do it very rarely on special occasions. But you go over there and people are like, oh my God, they're always drinking. I'm like, yeah, but they're drinking like a glass of wine with lunch, a pint with dinner, like everything, even the food, like, they're eating all the time. Yeah, they're eating tapas. Like they're eating an eighth of what we put on one plate. The portion size matters. And by the way, they walk 8 or 9 kilometers a day to and from work. Like everything in moderation, and that doesn't discriminate, to your point, to cannabis alone. Like it's anything in your life in moderation.
Exactly.
Yeah, definitely. 100%.
I remember you mentioning that you have like a home grow. When did you start doing that? I'm just curious.
Oh my gosh, when I was 14.
Oh wow! All right, so he knows the ins and outs of this.
I did start when I was really young, but no, I actually took a hiatus because again, I was traveling. 2019, I traveled 120,000 miles in the air. Give you an idea of how much I was traveling for building the brand I was at the time. So I did have to cut back some of my hobbies. I barely had enough time to wrench on my hot rods and ride my motorcycle. So I definitely wasn't getting into growing. But then the pandemic came, and while everyone else was making their sourdough and kombucha, I was like, I'm going to start growing.
I was perfecting my home grow.
I was, man. Like I had, everyone knows, some of my friends call me a can of snob. I'm a connoisseur. Or maybe, a can of geek. But I was collecting these great genetics everywhere I went. People would be like, hey, I heard you like the land race, the heirloom, the true, like where it all began. And so, a friend from South Africa got me some, not crossbred, just backbred Durban poison. And, I got some Maui Wowie and cat piss from Hawaii. And then just all these different. And so, I was like, well, if I'm grounded, if I'm at home, I might as well get back into it. I should have brought you guys some. I'm sorry.
No, it's all right.
I'll give some to Andrew this weekend. But so I got into growing it. I am a traditionalist. Like I do outdoor, full term, try to do as close to land race. Like what I took down right now, it's auto curing in our grove bags because I don't have time to burp because I'm traveling. But it's a Zihuatanejo, which is a Mexican land race straight out of southern Mexico, crossed with Thai.
Oh, very nice.
So it's a really interesting.
Cool. That sounds like a very interesting strain.
It is. It's a unique. Yeah, the terp profile is super interesting. So that's in cure. What I do, I learned this from the Italians too, because some people, in their opinion, think that the methodology we do in the States isn't really the traditional model. Like most people that grow outdoor, indoor, They'll dry for what we call it 60-60-14, right? 60% relative humidity in an ambient room, and then 60 degrees temperature for 14 days. You'll dry, and then it's a little bit of that voodoo, right? But it's like snapping sticks and squeezing buds. I know, right? People are always like, "Oh, that's
you have to be in like a professional in the industry for like 25 years, and you
know
what you're looking at, where you can go. Yeah, we're good.
That's exactly it. So everyone has that opinion, and so but again, it's where you're at. Yeah. But that's been the traditional model, and then most people cure for maybe 2 weeks. And I really learned from the Italians, and no surprise because they're very passionate about their wine and about their oil. Like everything they do is like
everything's for food.
It's craft. It's not just a hobby or a profession.
No,
like,
there's passion in there.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Spend the time and energy.
That's
perfect it.
And so I learned from a few growers over there. There's actually a Spanibus several years ago. Okay. And they're like, no, they're all to really get the proper maturity on specifically the terpenes. You need to age as well. So I'll do 2 weeks dry, give or take, 2 weeks cure, and then 2 months aging. And so it's just this model where you kind of just step down in your relative humidity to get down to the right level, and then just hold it and just leave it alone. Like literally you leave it in a sealed container. You don't pinch, you don't pull, you don't take anything out. And so I've practiced that. And so what I've taken down, I had to take it down early. We had crazy. It was 160. It was a degree warmer here than it was in Las Vegas in late summer here. It was insane. So we got this heat wave, so I had to take down early. And that kind of sucked. But still, I was like, I'm still going to stick to my model. And so right now it's about 2 weeks into the aging process of white grape. But I love it. It's therapeutic, just like cooking.
Cooking. I used to help my dad and his friends make homemade wine back in the day.
Yeah, it's like it's just
like it was.
Yeah, you love cooking.
Yeah,
you use it.
I love cooking.
It's so therapeutic for him.
I'm the same way. I'm so like anything. I remember I was going through this long, arduous interview process, like interview with like 10 directors, and then like the CEO and the VP. One of the last people I interviewed with was the director of HR. And they're usually the ones that have the most interesting questions because they're having to do it all the time, right?
Oh, yeah, totally.
And so she's asking me all the professional questions, and I really take this to heart because being a hiring manager myself, I'm like, I started really integrating this into mine, but I'm like, this is a cool question. She is all, what do you enjoy doing? What are you passionate about on a personal level, not just professionally? Like, what do you do in your spare time?
That's a good question.
Pretty much, right? Yeah. And because there needs to be a balance. We don't live to work, we work to live. And that's a mantra everyone should live by. And so I was like, I'm like, so, I like to cook, really love to cook, have this little seasoning business, my retirement plan. So I really love cooking. I'm like, I love my hot rods and love riding my motorcycle and wrenching on them. And, I do like to garden when I can. Yeah. So she's like, so you like doing things with your hands? You like creating? And I'm like, I was like total epiphany. I never connected those dots. I'm like,
wait, there's a common thread through all of these things that I like to do.
Like, I don't mind working with people and sitting in front of a computer all day, but when it comes to me and my passion, it's creating things and working with things with my hands.
Definitely.
And once I realized that, I'm like, that's my moment of zen. Is it doesn't matter if it's gardening or if it's fixing the hot rod or if it's cooking. Like, that is my getaway from the stress of 12-hour days.
Nice.
And cannabis plays into that very nicely.
Oh, no, definitely. Cannabis is a great way to relieve your daily stress after a long day of work or something like that. Like a lot of people I meet, a lot of like top end CEOs, stuff like that, a lot of them do not consume throughout the day. They wake up, maybe they'll do a little micro dose in the morning just to get like with their cup of coffee, and then the rest of the day they're straight, and then at night they'll take that heavy indigo or something to go to bed, and that's it. But actually, I've been kind of experimenting myself with the sleeping in cannabis because I know I recently saw a study that cannabis has a compound in it that suppresses REM sleep.
That's true.
And I forget what it's called. I think it starts with like an S or something like that.
So, the thing that occurs is, to your point, when there's an excessive amount of THC, almost like an excessive amount of alcohol. And again, you know this, you learned this in school, but a lot of people don't know that alcohol, first and foremost, is a stimulant and then a depressant. So when you take it in moderation, if you have that's why a lot of smart people have a glass of wine or a glass of beer, because initially it's a stimulant, but when you take an excessive amount, it becomes a depressant. That's the same as far as your point with the study on specifically THC. When you take an excessive amount, it makes things race so much that you aren't allowed to fall into REM. Yeah. So that's why a lot of people have shifted towards cannabinol, CBN. Yeah. And CBN, this is where this plant really is. It's a miracle on so many levels. But CBN, it's crazy. It's an oxidized iteration of THC. So it's what I call the ghost cannabinoid. Maybe that'll get
The ghost can
catch on at some point or another.
I mean, hey, they have in physics, they have the God particle.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Exactly. So I think it makes sense.
You never know. Yeah.
It could. So if you
trademark.
Exactly right. So even if you let your weed sit out on a windowsill for 5 months and forget about it at your cabin on the lake, like there's still benefits to that weed. And in many instances, it's oxidized because of exposure to light and oxygen, and it's converted to CBN. But cannabinol, that's what I gave to a lady sitting next, totally off the record, but sitting next to me on a plane. She was like, God, I just wish she's like, do you have any on you? I'm like, well, I have, what is kind of comparable to a sleeping pill. It's only 2.5 milligrams THC, 2.5 milligrams CBD. But it's literally 2% CBN, and that's all you need to help you fall asleep. It's essentially like melatonin kind of on steroids.
Okay.
In that it helps you fall asleep, stay asleep, but then if you only need 7 hours of sleep, you wake up in 7 hours.
Okay.
It's not an Ambien.
Yeah.
It's not going to knock you on your ass for 10 hours.
Yeah.
Because
come out zombie nation.
Yeah, because as I'm learning more and more professionally about the plant and all that, I was like, I saw that one study. I was like, oh, cool. I'm like, maybe this is why I wake up kind of groggy and stuff in the morning, because I smoke really close to bed to help me because my restless leg syndrome and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I get help. It helps a lot with that. So maybe I'm gonna look into the CBN.
Gel CBN, and just a good balance of cannabinoids. And you always want to keep an eye out. And it's tough in certain markets, but you want to stay away from isolates. That's nothing against some of these methodologies of extraction, but there's 3 different ways to extract traditionally. There's obviously ethanol, which has been the traditional alcohol, and then you have CO2, and then you have
the press,
BHO, butane, and butane hash oil. And so obviously these are all different methodologies to extract, but the core focus is always on the THC, not on other what we call minor cannabinoids.
They basically strip out all those other minor cannabinoids.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of the baby in the bathwater type. It's like, oh, it's cool. You're able to get what you want, but you're also losing what you don't. So I would recommend too, if you find anything with CBN, flash frozen, fresh frozen, live rosin, all those things are great because that's the different extraction, right? That's the only extract. That's using heat and pressure.
That's heat and pressure. That's it. No chemicals.
No stripping. But looking for broad spectrum or at minimum full spectrum. So something that again isn't just an isolate of THC or an isolate of CBN or an isolate of
it's not just CBD. One thing. It has all those things in there, and that's what we slightly touched on before, California is now big. The market's driven by high THC content.
Oh,
yeah, it's crazy.
People and consumers are like, oh my God, high THC contents. But then they don't realize that the THC is taking up all this room in the plant for all these other cannabinoids that are actually what's helping you and stuff like that. Because you can have a high THC content and not feel that high.
Well, and so again, especially like my generation, being a little bit older, there's a lot of people who, weed was what I smoked when I was quote unquote a kid, right? So they gave up after high school or college. And you guys probably have friends like this too, who got suckered into the whole alcohol. Oh yeah, it's more socially accepted. It's liquid, courage, all the rest of it.
All that stuff.
So you have friends that are like, oh, is it weed? Is it this, that? You have to educate them. But some of my friends have gotten the oil because it's the most convenient, it's the easiest.
Right.
And they're like, man, it's kind of weird though. I go from being sober to just being high, but it's like a cloudy high. And I'm like, that's because, to your point, it's all THC. They don't reintroduce the terpenes or the minor cannabinoids. So to your point, that's very much relevant in what you're consuming. And this is the interesting thing is a lot of my friends who are OGs and they're very, very excellent at what they do as far as their craft, they're not consuming those highest THC level. Plus, anyway, nothing can have 45%. I mean, the median THC level in this country is 21%.
Yeah.
But
anything over that, you're just getting, it's just gassed up.
Yeah, it's totally gassed. They're lacing it. They're throwing keef on it, or the lab is, or they're paying off the lab.
Yeah.
Just put it that way. Yeah. But a lot of my friends who are OGs, they're smoking things like forbidden fruit, where the median THC is 15%, anywhere from 14 to 16%. So we'll say 15%. So it's a lower THC. But the terpene percentage versus 1 to 2%, it's more like 4 or 5%.
Yeah.
So it has that
compared to what's usually on the market.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So I'm with you. I'm frustrated. We don't like to compare cannabis to alcohol. It's hard not to because both have gone through prohibition.
It is.
Yeah.
But that's the thing I ask people is post-prohibition is before all of our time. But post-prohibition, not everybody is like, I still want bathtub gin. I still want vodka. People are like, I miss beer. I miss wine. Yeah. I want things that are experiential to getting that buzz. And to your point, that unfortunately, the minority group of consumers is what's really driving the majority's product. And that is way too high THC. Like I don't think a single dose should be 10 milligrams.
Totally. I go into a dispensary and they go, oh, like what kind of flower are you looking for? Whatever. I'm like, let me see your outdoor grown stuff first.
Yeah.
I'm like the indoor grown stuff.
They're like,
Yeah, they're like, we may have. Let me check the back. We may have like one or two.
It's exactly true.
Yeah,
it's exactly. And I just had a conversation about it too, because again, I'm old school, love the outdoor, but too many people are putting that emphasis on the genotype. Like, what are these genetics? Is it going to put out high THC? They're not focusing on, there's 3 factors in the experiential, right? So there's the geno, the pheno, and then the chemo, which is, so genotype is the type of genetics you're starting with. Phenotype is that outside factor. So what are you feeding it? What kind of light, what kind of water, what kind of oxygen?
I was going to say, we have to put it in kind of layman's terms a little bit.
Exactly.
We are talking audience of
so the phenotype is like, it's not just, I've got a daisy. It's a daisy plant that you put in manure versus in black soil, and you're feeding it reverse osmosis water versus tap water that has chlorine in it. So that's the kind of thing that really influences what we call the phenotype. The chemotype is the last step. That's how your body intakes, because you have an endocannabinoid system, or ECS. We all do. You have the C1, C2 receptors. So it's how your body uptakes it. And so, to your point, it's frustrating when all they care about is THC, because for a lot of people, the type of terpene, like for me, myrcene and limonene for the win. Like some people love pinene or other. Like for me, like the myrcene is sedative. It's very similar to CBN as far as how cannabinoids are. And so that's what I look for. But to your point, like unfortunately, and education's key, there's still that motivation for the loud. I need the loud. I need the fire.
I need the loud.
Yeah. It's like, stop with your loud. Like, I don't need white lightning.
It's funny how things progress, because like when I was in high school and stuff like that, loud was like, it smelled. Like, it wasn't, it didn't like how high I got.
No,
it
just
really
how
didn't
it hit you in the face.
Like if you could smell the dude walking down the block, or like right when he opens the window from his car or something, like you're like, damn, that is some loud.
That's loud.
And you're like, that's loud. Now it's like high THC content, and it's like I saw it a sad place that the market was turning.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, and we're trying. A lot of us. That's one thing. A friend that connected the dots are like, one thing I've noticed about you is like you're really leading the path on pushing the understanding and knowledge around terpenes. And I'm like, because again,
it's important.
Yeah, it is. And the analogy I use is, like you guys heard me say, like cannabinoids, specifically THC, that's the engine. So that's what gives you the power of the high. Yeah. But the steering wheel is the terpene. So the experiential.
That determines where you go.
That determines where you go in your high, So that determines if you're upbeat and want to, clean the house, or if you're down and you want to hang out and watch Netflix and chill. Like that's a factor there. But again, it's really unfortunate, because the wrong people are driving that old school narrative. And again, I tell people, how many people wanted 151 post-prohibition versus a nice quality beer, or a nice bottle of wine.
Totally.
But we'll slowly but surely, there's enough of us that continue to advocate towards what I call will be the cannabis 2.0 of the industry and education. So we'll get there.
Yeah, definitely. And I know some people out there probably listening are probably really curious. What do you think the best, if you would give 1 or 2 tips out there for a home grow?
Oh wow!
Like what would be like the best? Like
that's a good question.
Think, like most important, most important things to like check off on your list.
Man, that it really.
What did you think?
It starts the best grow. Really, it starts at the beginning. So making sure, it's interesting. I just read a quote today. I'm always reading. If you stop learning, you stop living is one of my mantras.
Totally.
And someone said, if I was responsible for cutting down several trees over several hours, the first hour I'd spend sharpening my axe. And I was like, wow. So what they're saying is being prepared. And that's the same thing. Myself, I'm advanced dive certified. We have some great diving off the coast here in SoCal. Awesome. And so the one thing that we're taught, first and foremost, is plan to dive, dive to plan. And what that means is exactly that. If I'm going down 4 atmospheres and I have enough air to maintain an hour dive for 4 atmospheres, I need to plan accordingly. That doesn't mean go down to 50 feet. That means I can only go down to 40 feet for an hour. If I go down to 50, that's only going to be 50 minutes. So that's the same thing I'd recommend for a grower is, always start first and foremost with the right media, with the right environment, because soil is if you're doing soil, if you're doing traditional, I mean, some people, if you're doing aquaponics or hydroponics,
something like that,
props to you. Takes a lot more time, takes a lot more energy, and takes a lot more money, in my opinion. But if you're going old school, like make sure you start with the right media. And then it's the little things, like people just for you all, look at, and I'm not condoning drinking out of a water bottle, but there's a reason why we drink out of a water bottle, because we know that's got certain COAs and a control on what we're consuming, the pH and the minerals and all the rest of it. So even your water, like people, when I see them trying to grow a plant and they're feeding water out of the faucet that has almost, I'd say 95% of the time in this country has chlorine.
Oh yeah,
Right.
and then oftentimes has fluoride. Surprise, plants don't like that. That's
they don't.
It's not going to work
It's not
well.
natural.
This isn't idiocracy.
It's not in the rainwater.
Right?
It shouldn't be in there.
Yeah, no throwing Gatorade on the crops like Mike Judge taught us in Idiocracy. That's not the way. So making sure you have the right foundational, and there's some basic tools. Buy yourself, on that note, buy yourself some sort of pH tool to be able to measure the water and what the pH balance is, because just like our bodies, we like to be around, between 6 and 7 for our pH. Plants do too. No surprise. Most of my buddies, they're
living beings.
Yep.
They have a sweet spot too.
Yeah.
They very much do. And then the other is just, I would have to say, just be patient. Like, you can't rush, just like us growing up. Like, as much as we want to be adults when we were little, so we could do things like drive or like stay out late or whatever. Like, you really have to take one step at a time. And there's a reason why there's phases, like the vegetative state before you go into the flower state. Like, you need to take your time and don't rush it. And one of the things I constantly preach is, and I know this is more than a few, sorry.
Oh, no.
I'm
sure there's people out there right now who are like, write this down.
Yeah.
The one thing I'll say.
Yeah.
Exactly right. So keep this in mind, but literally, growing is only half the battle. So growing the plant, as much time, energy, and effort that we put into growing. And this is great. I'm not trying to name drop, but friends with Ed Rosenthal, who's a very well-recognized grower, and a lot of people know the Grower's Handbook and learn from it, like myself. Yeah. I was just on a phone call with him this morning, good friends, and we were just talking about this. And he agrees, because he used to put so much emphasis on the grow. Growing's only half the battle. How you dry the flower, how you cure the flower,
so
and
many
how
other
you
steps.
store it. Yeah,
I've had friends that have, like, first grow, especially up in New York.
Yep.
They harvest, and then all of a sudden, like, they crack the thing, it just puffs. It's like puffs and mold and stuff. I'm like, bruh. I'm like, you just wasted all that time and money just to destroy your stuff at the end.
That's exactly it. So those few tools that we use during the grow is the pH to make sure we're talking like $15 on Amazon, like literally just a pH meter that you put in your water to make sure it's balanced. If you can do the organic method like me, if you need to add, if it's too high, you add a little bit of lemon juice, and that brings it down because you're adding acidic to it. You can go on the inverse with base, but they also have up and down where you can purchase liquids.
Yeah, you can purchase liquids and stuff like that.
And then the other side would be a hygrometer. You can literally, again, not to plug Amazon, but for like $10 or $15, you can buy.
You got everything on there.
Yeah, you can buy a meter, and it literally can just be a little stand that you put in your dry room or your dry tent or your dry box, whatever you're drying in your cure room, and it literally will tell you the ambient and the relative humidity. I mean, like mine, I could show you guys. I literally have an app that tells me what the temperature is right now. And
that's awesome.
Range. Yeah. So use the tools. No more.
Use your technology.
Yeah, use your technology. Stop snapping sticks, man, and squeezing buds. Like, just stop.
Yeah,
there's so many resources.
This is so many
there really
resources
is
out there.
I know you have a podcast on the network. I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit before we close out here, but
yeah, definitely. Yeah. So the podcast I'm on here, I've been doing for a few years now. Same thing. Good thing it came out of the pandemic. Andrew has hit me up for some time, and I'm like, okay, I'm finally off the road.
Yeah.
So mine is called.
Got time for it.
Yeah, I got time for it. So mine is Cure to Consumption, and we talk about everything from how it helps us, those of us who are medical advocates, medicinal advocates, how it helps towards the cure, but talking about the consumption in general and how, to your point, like I talk about a lot of the same stuff, like the tabooisms and the stigmas associated with this plant, and the fact that there's still capital punishment in the Middle East for this plant as opposed to encouragement to growing them here in California. I mean, such an extreme. So I have all kinds of people on too. I've had on industry doctors, lawyers, scientists, but I've had on some great geneticists and growers. I had on an individual that actually owns a dispensary literally at the gateway to Yosemite, right next to Mono Lake and Mammoth.
Awesome.
That's who you guys got to meet earlier.
Cool.
That's Corey.
Awesome. That's really cool.
Nice.
Yeah, so I have people like that that come in who, they literally are that only resource for this medicine and for recreational, but for this medicine in a specific market. So I have on some very unique individuals like that. And it's just like this. It's very conversational. I have some people who are a little business and are like, can you send me your questions? And I'm like, no, I can just tell them to you right now. I said, do you know your name? Do you know what you're passionate about? Do you know why you got in the industry?
It's an organic conversation.
Yeah, it's a very organic.
It's fun.
That's what we want to hear, right?
It's not a news interview. It's a conversation.
Right.
That's
Otherwise
exactly
it's going to be so boring. No one wants to listen to that.
Yeah. I mean, go tune into NPR. Nothing against NPR. But go tune into something else if you want the news. And
totally.
Yeah, it's this educational conversation like this that just flows that people like listening to on their drive home, or they like tuning into on the couch, besides, the mind-numbing television that we've all grown up with. So
at the end of the day, you sit there with your bong or your blunt and your dog and you just listen.
You're just like, hey, this is a cool show, man. I want to tune in. So that's what mine is. And definitely.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Would love to have you guys on at some point too.
Yeah.
That would be fun. Yeah, definitely. I've learned so much
background.
Just listening to you talk today. It's been great.
I love it. That's definitely my motivation. Like this.
And I think one more thing I want to touch on, because I always like diving into the business side of things also.
Yeah, for sure.
You were talking about a lot about like building brands and stuff like that. So for someone who has their cannabis company out there, they're looking to grow their brand, what would you say is like, what would first steps or best things for them to do?
That's an excellent question. Yeah. So first off, if you talk to anyone who's plant touching this industry and you ask them that question, they'd say run. Like a lot of my friends are like, go the other way, because it is so hard. Like this industry, it started out as a community, right? And I'm not saying banking started out as a community, groceries, everything started out as a community before an industry. But this really is a community first still, and you need to be passionate. You don't have to be a consumer. We did a study when I was at Weed Maps. We had 400 employees, 34% of them didn't consume. I thought that was awesome, because everyone was passionate. Just some people just chose not to consume or couldn't.
Yeah,
so still support.
I would say, they still support. So you definitely, I will say that it's very much, in my opinion, necessity to at some level be passionate. Be passionate about freeing the plant, or about the medicinal attributes, or about erasing the stigma. But you got to be passionate.
Long story short, be passionate about what you do.
That's it.
Treat your cannabis plants like you do your dogs.
Love them.
Heart and soul.
And try that outdoor grown bud out there. Support an outdoor grower.
Oh my gosh,
too,
you guys. You'd be surprised. Yeah. Trust me, it's fire.
And
thanks so much for coming on the show, Lance. So nice to meet you, and we'll definitely have you on again.
Yes, I love that. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Any shout outs, friends and family out there?
Shout outs? Everyone back home tuning in right now. Shout out to Grow Bags.
Yeah,
obviously go pick one up if you're curing your homemade bud and stuff like that.
Yep,
and
definitely.
You got any shout outs you want to give to somebody?
No, just if anyone, feel free to hit me up. I'm all about being that educational resource. 805 Lance on all social media handles, or lancelambert.com takes you to my LinkedIn page if you want to talk more business. I'm all about supporting the movement.
Awesome.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Yeah, check out our socials. We'll link you there. And till next time.
Thanks.
You're listening to Hayes Radio Network, Cannabis Lifestyle Radio.